Hello, scholars. This is Mr. Myers, lesson 4.8 on state government, part 1. As always, please take good structured notes of our objectives. We'll be learning about the Missouri Constitution, the General Assembly, the House and the Senate, and the Missouri Nonpartisan Court Plan for selecting judges. All right, let's go. Okay, so the Missouri Constitution was originally written in 1820. You might remember the famous Missouri Compromise, right, when Missouri became a state. That's when we first drafted the Constitution. Our current version was written in 1945. We're actually on our fourth version of the Constitution. And that's partly because there's a unique provision written in our Constitution which basically allows for the Constitution to be rewritten every 20 years. It's kind of like an automatic mechanism where it asks the people, hey, do you want to rewrite the Constitution? So there are basically three different ways in which the Constitution of Missouri can be modified. One is by the method we just talked about, a rewrite every 20 years, or that opportunity. The second would be the legislature proposes some kind of constitutional amendment or change, and they can propose it with a simple majority vote, and voters can ratify it with a simple majority vote. So that bar is relatively low. If you remember, to amend the U.S. Constitution, you would need 2/3 of both houses of Congress to propose an amendment and 3/4 of state legislatures to ratify. So this bar is relatively low in comparison to amending the U.S. Constitution. The third way is by garnering a large number of signatures via petition in order to place something on the ballot. And this is, of course, what happened with Amendment 3, the recreational marijuana bill or amendment that passed recently in Missouri. And voters can ratify that with a simple majority vote. So in the grand scheme of things, it's relatively easy to change the Missouri Constitution. Okay, so in terms of the General Assembly, you're going to note that there's a lot of similarities with the Missouri General Assembly and U.S. Congress. For example, the General Assembly is a bicameral legislature. There are two houses, a House and a Senate. One major difference would be term limits. So in the Missouri House and the Senate, you're term limited in both. There's only 8 years that you can serve in each house. So that would be 4 2-year terms in the House and 2 4-year terms in the Senate. So the maximum you could serve in the General Assembly would be 16 years. Now, we've already talked about redistricting and reapportionment at the federal level, right? Every 10 years there's a census taken, and then based on differences in the population and where people are moving, districts get redrawn both at the federal level and at the state level. It is important to note that senators in Missouri serve a district, whereas senators in Congress serve the entire state. So that is one important difference in the Senate. So the Senate will actually participate in the redistricting process as well as the House. In terms of the process for how a bill becomes a law, it's very similar. You need a simple majority to pass the bill in both houses. It has to be passed in identical form. If two different versions of the same bill are passed, you have a conference committee to iron out the differences, and then it would go to the governor, and the governor has 15 days to either veto or sign the bill into law. And again, very much like Congress, you need a 2/3 majority to override a governor's veto. Now, on to some specifics about the Missouri House. The size is 163 members. You have to be 24 years old, a resident of the district in which you are serving for 1 year, and a voter for 2 years. Your term is a 2-year term, and in the House you have leadership positions that are very similar to Congress. You have Speaker of the House, you have majority and minority leaders, you have whips, and so on and so forth. And very much like the House of Representatives and Congress, the Missouri House of Representatives has the sole power to impeach officials. So if they were to impeach the governor, the trial would again take place in the Missouri Senate, just like the trial, at the federal level would take place in the U.S. Senate. In the Missouri Senate, there are 34 members, 34 districts. Qualifications would be 30 years old, a resident of the district in which you are serving for 1 year, and an eligible voter for at least 3 years. You would serve a 4-year term, and again, leadership positions, officers are very similar to the U.S. Senate. So the last thing we're going to talk about today are Missouri judges and how they're chosen. Now, the first thing to note is that in the vast majority of states, judges are elected by popular vote, very similar to the way that people elect their representatives. In Missouri, we have something called the Missouri Plan. It's a little bit different, and in fact, some states have actually adopted the way that Missouri chooses their judges. Here's how the Missouri Plan works. First, there's a group of nonpartisan folks, lay people, who are not, hardcore Democratic or Republican hacks. And this group of people selects a list of judges who they think are all qualified, and they give that list to the governor. When the governor gets that list, the governor will choose one candidate from that list, and that person will then automatically start serving as a judge. in the next election cycle, whenever that might be, the judge is up for kind of re-election, but they're not running against anyone else. They're simply running on whether or not they should be retained. In other words, the voters have a choice to either retain or keep that judge based on the way the judge has ruled, or to vote that judge out. And if the judge is voted out, then the process would start again. And that's relatively unique. It's designed to try to take politics out of the way that we select our judges. Now, on paper, this looks like a really brilliant plan. In practice, it has some problems. So in our last lesson on 4.10, we'll talk a little bit about some of the issues related to the Missouri plan. And in terms of the terms that Missouri judges serve, on the circuit court, judges serve for 6-year terms. On the Supreme Court, they serve for 12 years, as well as judges on the Court of Appeals. And at the age of 70, they have to retire. And that's something different than Supreme Court judges at the federal level. So I had mentioned what happens at the first election that happens after a governor chooses a judge. That process also happens every 6 or 12 years, depending on whether you're a circuit court judge or a Supreme Court judge. So if you serve one term on the Supreme Court for 12 years and you're not 70 years old, you'll be on the ballot and voters can vote whether or not to retain or to remove you. And if retained, they would continue to serve, and if removed, the process starts all over again. Okay, I hope you took good notes, and please bring any questions to class.